But you know, one of the ways that we usually start these interviews is I ask people to tell us how their feminist identity developed.
Right.
And I do want to ask you that.
Yeah.
But I was kind of fooling around with the idea while you were talking today, is maybe starting with the question, how did you become a liberation psychologist?
Yeah.
So actually, I'll leave it up to you. If you'd like to
Yeah.
talk about how you became a feminist, or how you became a liberation psychologist, and or how those two things have come together for you.
Yeah, well, I think they do come together because feminist and liberation psychology are both about social justice, and I can probably trace that back biographically or autobiographically to my family situation, because both my parents were incredibly committed to fairness and in particular gender equality.
Okay.
So in our family we didn't have the boys doing this and the girls doing that.
Okay.
We had an equal distribution of household labour, and things were done according to age actually rather than gender.
Okay.
But there was a lot of talk about gender equality and that we weren't doing things that way.
Did that come about because of their backgrounds? Or
Yeah, I often wondered about that actually, because that was in the 1960s and 70s, long before feminism.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've come upon is the idea that in families of resistance there is more gender equality, and certainly my father's side of the family, they were involved. My grandparents were both involved in the anti-colonial struggle.
Okay.
And fought in my grandfather the War of Independence, and my grandmother was also involved in that. And there's this notion that it's not necessarily explicit, but because of that there's a more gender equality ethos. We've never really gone to the root of where it came from, but both of them were very strong about it and social justice issues. Yeah.
Okay. So I take it you had siblings then?
Yeah, those 8 of us actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that might be another factor in my sort of orientation, because I'm in the middle, I'm number 3 of a large family,
Yeah. So you remember being treated very fairly in terms of gender, that there weren't gendered expectations?
I mean, it happened, you know, gender, of course it did, in all kinds of different ways, but there was we definitely didn't have that, you know, the boys don't do housework. I mean, that was just not even remotely in the picture, or that they aren't supposed to, or the girls wouldn't go to college. They were two things that were very common in Ireland at the time, but girls didn't need third level education because what would they need it for? They were going to be mothers. Not at all, there was none of that.
Was there a point at which you realized that that was an unusual thing, that this wasn't the way the world really worked? Or was there a point at which you really became aware of feminism and started to
I definitely became aware of feminism at a point. In fact, the women's movement started in Ireland sort of dramatically, in that, you know, a bunch of women got together and literally formed a group, and they then went on national television, and there was a lot of talk about it, and then books were coming in, like Betty Friedan and Germaine Greer and Simone de Beauvoir. And in my university, a women's liberation group started, and I had an experience with them. Will I tell the story?
Yes.
I was doing computer science at the time, and kind of not that aware of feminism, and we thought we were going to make money by setting up computer dating. And we set up we gave out these questionnaires, and we were going to match people. This is back in the 70s now.
Right.
And unknown to me, now I ran into stuff right away with that group because the boys were being quite sexist, and we were trying to object, and they were trying to tell us, oh, you know, the usual stuff, don't spoil the fun. And we were silenced, as I would now be able to say, although I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
Anyway, we set up this thing in the restaurant with Olivia Newton-John and some male equivalent, I forget who, John Travolta, I presume. So this was going to be the computer dating table.
Okay.
And we had these things, and I think actually there was a cartoon as well that was quite objectionable, which we had objected to and we were overridden, but didn't have the strength to turn around and say, I'm not going to sit on the table if you don't put that, if you put that up. And so I remember being there and feeling uneasy.
Okay.
The next thing, this bunch of 20 women came storming into the restaurant.
Wow.
And Betty Purcell, who was the leader, came right up to the table, and the guys literally were kind of started shaking. And she had literally, like, this classic, her hands on her hips, how dare you put that up, and do you know how sexist that is, and we demand you take it down. And like that, it was gone. And I went straight over and joined the group.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty dramatic, actually, kind of introduction.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about then how your membership in that group kind of developed. And
I kind of went to a few meetings, but what then happened was another group was started in town. They were called Irish Women United, and they were the most radical feminist group. There was this classic, you know, sort of thing that happened in a lot of countries, a kind of more reformist, liberal kind of group, and then this radical feminist group.
Okay, yeah.
And they had produced a magazine called Banshee, and they were selling it in the bar, and I bought it and read it and went, this is it, this is what I want. And I was with a friend as well who had the same reaction. So we literally went to the next meeting in town, in Dublin. And as soon as I went in, I realised this is where I want to be. And I stayed with that group then, Irish Women United.
Okay.
And my friend kind of dropped away. So I kind of shifted from the campus-based into the more sort of city centre kind of group.
And towards a more radical feminism.
Yeah, they were very radical. Now, at that time, I defined myself as heterosexual. I didn't. The whole lesbian straight thing was not very well developed in Ireland. It was women, you know, and there was women's discos, as we call them, and that involved women of all orientations. It wasn't broken down into straight or gay. It was just women together. Okay. So you could go into the room, and there's just a lot of very strong women who were really women oriented, but not necessarily lesbian. And so I knew I was fascinated by some women more than others, but I didn't know why. Right. But that's, I think, part of what kept me there was the kind of fascination piece, as well as though the intellectual piece, which is really about being radical and, you know, ideas, you know, talking real kind of feminist theory stuff, developing a charter, having a magazine, going out and doing direct action.